Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure. This invitation that came from my fellow Mark. We've been working together on bringing this beautiful wiki up to standard this past few years. And as you can see, I'm starting with a picture of the foundation of the wiki. That's 2005. It's a while ago. It's by the early wiki movement. It's not exactly at the very start, but it was, let's say, very early in the movement. And as you might imagine, over the years, it accumulated a lot of changes and particular questions because it is independent, right? It's not part of the core media wiki structure and the things that surround it. So to give you some context, uh, that was me back then. And when I started editing Wikipedia, I was 15 and I became a sysop. And back in the day, even the main Wikipedia project was starting to figure out how to organize content and how to actually structure everything that was going on. And I was part of that initial movement. I was into sorting articles, curating hubs, and organizing stubs. And that's a lot of foreshadowing for what was to come, to be very honest. Way later in my career, I sought ICANNWiki's director in 2024, and we had basically the goal of bringing it back to its prior glory, let's say, because this wiki is very big. It was very relevant, and it is becoming very relevant again, but it suffered a little bit during the pandemic for reasons that I'll make clear soon in terms of how this community operates. And it's sponsor based, largely within its industry, very specialized, and basically around its own community. And we interact directly with the people and the institutions that we document uh, in person. So if you've ever been part of an edit war and thought that was difficult, how about you meet those people every 3 months, right? So it is a very interesting space to be running a wiki. And it's global, it's multicultural and multi-stakeholders. So we have government actors, we have businesses, we have civil society, and internet community operators all together in the same place. So it's a little bit of an interesting challenge, at least for people who love wikis like we do. And before I dive deeper into this, what is ICANN, right? Mark kind of set the stage for this, but to give you a better visual clue as to what goes on, they have these big meetings every 3 or 4 months in which people get together to discuss domain name policies, IP address allocation policies, and some other functions because essentially they run the DNS, right? So domain name resolution, one way or another, goes through ICANN. There have been attempts at different models for domain name resolution. We saw a lot of those with the blockchain, the crypto space, and they're mostly folding now because this is the only globally deployed solution that's in every single device in the planet, right? If you want to write a new domain name resolution system, you first have to get to every system in the planet, which is not as easy as people thought it was, right? So I can essentially, I'm at that bullet that read what I can does, right? It keeps the global interoperable internet and it implements policy through very iterative work. A normal policy from this type takes 2 to 3 years to take place. Some of them took 10 years, and all of that has to be documented and tracked. And there's a lot of people coming and growing through these processes. So there was a need, a perceived need for a specialized community wiki for this. What ICANN does not do, it mostly does not regulate content on the internet, more or less. Does not decide what websites may say and their policies, and it does not run the whole internet, sort of, because if you take ICANN down, the internet does stop working. So, as you can see, it's a very unique institution, very uniquely positioned, and why ICANNWiki structurally unusual, right? Most of our content is not general content that you would find in most Wikipedias or in independent media wiki projects. This is mostly about this community and what it does and the things that take place within the ICANN meetings that go on around the world. So there is a certain iteration to all of this, a certain regular contact with the people that are shaping this wiki. We meet them around the world. We discuss issues with them. We get feedback live from them, from what is working and what is not working on the website. So this is actually a very interesting part as a developer, because whenever I implement something, it's not that I get emails about it. I get people dropping by and saying, "Hey, this was good," or "This is bad." So there's a lot of that sort of iteration loop that can be, it's very rewarding, but very intimidating as well. But mostly it's been a positive thing. In the photo that you see on our screen, that's one of our booths that was in Dublin recently at the end of last year. They're usually pretty packed. It's a bit of a community interaction space that people go to talk about um, the different, activities that they're doing. So it does serve a social function as well. So every 3 months, this is me, right? I write this email on repeat every 3 months, right? I reach out to my friend Mark H and go like, "Hey, please watch out, the server is about to explode. Don't leave me hanging." And he can attest to that. It's a very it's a repeating pattern, right? Because every time an ICANN meeting takes place, there are DDoS attacks against the ICANN institution itself, and we are collateral damage to that because we have ICANN in the name, so it must be something related. The influx of registration also jumps from 2, 3 a day to 30, 50, 70 at a time. Things just escalate very fast, and I think that Mark does have a lot. The other Mark, the Mark you see in front of you, does have a lot to add about this. So when I wrap up my presentation, it would be really good to get some insight from him as to how he reacts when those emails land in his mailbox, because again, it's the sort of thing that is very particular to the work that we are doing and to the conditions that we are working under, right? So now that I've set the stage, this is what I inherited in 2024, right? There were many phases and management stages to ICANNWiki, and as you might imagine, there's a bit of a balance going on there. You need an academic slash content side, and at the same time, you need technical management. And at times, they had content managers, but not technical managers, or the other way around, and different people with different visions from different countries. So a lot of what I inherited looked like a patchwork. It was a lot of like 3, 4 year cycles of dev or intentions, um, times 7 times 8, and all packed in little niches that didn't quite talk to each other. So a lot of things were hard coded, but not even in the same way, right? They were hard coded in whatever way that one person thought was good, and then the next one hard coded differently, and everything was half connected. The templates didn't really dialogue. The Even the CSS wasn't really wired. We had a common .css, and that was not actually wired to the project. So it was very interesting from that perspective. I guess I was expecting less of a challenge, but that's what we got dealt. I remember very early on talking to Mark H and going, "Hey, we need to set up like a common.js and it needs to work," right? We were starting from there. So it's not like we were really starting from the bottom. So that comes with its with its bonuses as well. It's just not bad stuff. It did allow us to plan something unique and interesting, but it's also a lot of work, right? And the core problem is we had this four competing factors to always balance, right? Because it was not just about adding features. That was kind of done. Features had been added ad hoc for 20 years. It was more about how do we wrap this entire thing together in a way that actually makes sense, right? Because to have a good presentation layer to actually structure 20 years of data that was, roughly categorized. Like it had some categories used very, they were never normalized. So yes, we had categories, but they were not normalized, so they didn't talk to each other. We had the same category for three different things. So for example, one of the stakeholders from an ICANN meeting is people who identify as civil society, right? But we had that expressed in many ways as civil society, as individual users, as end users, and they were all supposed to be the same thing. So it's not like categories were helping us a whole lot in that case. And, due to the reality of the community we work with, this changes a lot as well because people will change jobs, they will change affiliations, and we have to reflect that in a live way. So this cross, let's say, was at the heart of thinking about restructuring this project. How do we balance out these different things um, while running live? So at no point we could really take the website down. That was not really an option. And so we had to fix the plane as it was flying. And that did lead to um, let's say, not problems, but some stalls. And we can talk more about that later as well. Another thing that I can talk together with Mark H. And what were we looking at, right? So when I first landed, we were falling behind on the MediaWiki version, and eventually we stabilized it in 1.43. And in terms of scripting, and I don't know if there are any people related with the Scribunto project in the audience, and I'll ask for forgiveness because I will complain a little bit about Scribunto. It has been parked in Lua 5.1 forever. Um, and theoretically was supposed to support different languages, never mind versions, but it's been there. Uh, Lua is not an intuitive language. It's not pleasant to code. It breaks in weird ways. It doesn't notify when it breaks. It's badly supported. LLMs don't really understand it, so you have to do a lot of hand coding most of the time. So, I mean, wikis are fun. Lua is not. That being my main point, right? I've learned to deal with it, but I'm leaving it in the suggestion bucket as someone who had to code a system from scratch in Lua pretty much. We might want to look into this a little bit. At least bump up the Lua version because 5.1 has so many weird restrictions in terms of how the tables can call each other. But hey, that's just me complaining. Rant has ended. Let's move on. And we decided on Semantic Media Wiki. I don't know how much Mark H had worked with this. I had worked with it somewhat, but on a closed wiki, right? So an intranet type wiki, and over there the experience had been pleasant enough, um, because it's a very ad hoc system. It scales pretty much however you want. But that also means it scales pretty much however you want, right? That's another thing that we learned. Semantic Media Wiki is powerful, it's good, and it's something that I'm enjoying using in our project, but it's also um, maybe a little too unconstrained. Maybe, I was talking to Mark the other day, and he said that there are new developments on this front, so I'm not gonna brand him on this, but it's very good. It's very useful. I do think there's a lot to be extracted from the system, and I'll show to some degree what we are extracting from it. But it has its ups and downs. And operationally, you know, we are on our way to having a proper staging server, but a lot of the test was done live, so that implied a lot of, iteration and being very careful about it, right? So some of the things that we learned along the way, and stop me if I'm sounding like a complete noob, but those are things that I didn't know per se, is how gadgets are useful. uh, okay, I knew gadgets were useful, but the way they're named, it makes it look like they are just decorations to put on a bar, on a sidebar, right? And gadgets are actually a way to tap into the resource loader without having to mess with the resource loader, right? And that was part of the operational reality that I started learning. It's not just garnish for users to do customization. It's a way to tap into the resource loader, and that helped a lot, to be honest, because one of the things we'll talk about is cumulative layout shifts. And when dealing with that, this is actually very important. The difference in timing that a gadget can provide is actually pretty important. So here's when we get started with this cumulative layout shift problem. Um, MediaWiki is works in a stack that I don't think is as clear as the dev community thinks it is, at least from an implementer side and somebody who's not contributing to core, right? I'm a developer in the sense that I manage a wiki, but I'm not working with core, and a lot of things didn't make sense for me until I started really looking into them. So when you start at 0 milliseconds, you're basically getting the data straight from the server. Then JavaScript starts rendering after that, and not exactly in a lazy way. It's kind of synchronous in some senses. Then you start injecting whatever you coded into the page, and all of that, when it interacts, right? And when external fonts are loaded, it just creates a lot of popping. Like it populates here, then it populates there, then things change. Um, and so, how do you actually create something interactive? Because the answer is not just Lua. I tried just Lua, but that doesn't solve the problem entirely because of a lot of the limitations that we have in terms of sandboxing for Lua. So you at some point you have to combine JavaScript. Um, and there may be other options that I'm not aware of, but at least from my research, you need to put some JavaScript somewhere at some point. And you have to account for the fact that this is all placed in an actual article, um, or an actual page to be more accurate. So you're dealing with things coming directly from the server at the resource loader level. Lua comes mostly packed with that, but there are some exceptions. Sometimes it doesn't work as synchronously as you would imagine. You do have to tweak it a lot, um, declare some up values and things like that, and then you get JavaScript injected on top of that. So by the time JavaScript arrives, if you're manipulating the layout, it will jump, right? And search engines penalize that a lot. I didn't know how much until I really looked into it. They penalize it like very severely. This is considered like incredibly bad practice. And even native, even normal MediaWiki extensions do this. To be honest, even when you're working with extensions, they will change the layout of the screen in real time. And that is something that's actually, if you're running an independent wiki, that's the sort of thing that you need to be aware of, because we were getting impacted a lot, and for no well, for not for no reason, but for avoidable reasons, right? So what I ended up landing on is pre-reserving precisely what I'll need from the start, which is not as simple as it seems because we are dealing with a reactive web, right? We are working all the way from mobile to 4K screens where we need to actually develop this. So pre-allocation is not as easy as it was back in 2005, where you just assumed people were on a 800 by 600 display and you called it a day, right? And you even wrote at the bottom like best displayed at 800 by 600, right? This is not how this works anymore. We need to be actually reactive to how we do that. So I start by rendering a safe container, um, and before first paint, I already set a minimum height and try as best as possible to lock positions so that when JavaScript actually lands, it lands perfectly within that empty container without shifting it at all, right? And I thought initially that the correct way to do this with CSS would be Flexbox. At least from my experience with non-wiki projects, Flexboxes are kind of magical. They just sort of solve the website for you. But it turns out that this wasn't really the truth, at least for a wiki. Um, Flexboxes are very useful because they're dynamic, but they're not meant for the use case that we have here. I really found out that CSS grids were actually far better options. They are very explicit. You can really make them work the way you intend, and they react well to population, right? They react pretty well to population, and that made us go from this 2-3 visible shifts per paint to 0 CLS. And I'm gonna, just to give clarity of what I'm talking about, I'm gonna present the actual website to show what CLS we were talking about here, um, which is basically, I'll give the main page example here, right? I'll project the main screen for you so you can see um, what I'm talking about in practice. Just give me 1 second. Right here, share, and here is ICANNWiki, right? So for this, when you are seeing this main page here, I made a create a new page gadget. Why? Because users who are not wiki experts, they don't know that they should be searching for the article and clicking the red link. That's just not their reality. And people are always like asking us to create pages for them. But to do this here competently, I needed the JavaScript for this portion here, right? For the actual entries. So what happens when I reload the page, as you can see, it blinks in place, right? Because it is populating the precise layout that I reserved, right? So I refreshed too much. So the thing about that is, this was a problem for quite a while. This was not exactly intuitive to solve because the system just kept sort of fighting against me. So that's why I guess I'm trying to give some of this advice because it looks simple once it's solved. At the time, it wasn't that simple, right? Like how to make Lua, JavaScript, and HTML5 play nice with each other within a MediaWiki context, right? So, well, I'm giving this. I don't expect you guys to to parse this out right now, right? So, I'm mostly just presenting this if the for later consumption. So my second actual proposition here is how we organize the data. So first, it was about how to implement new features in a way that was pleasant for search engines, which did boost our search engine optimization a lot, to be honest. A lot of the things we did boost that SEO. We got better results both from um, exposing metadata via Semantic Media Wiki and from reducing cumulative layout shifts and serving better pages and killing off like dead ends of the project. But when I started looking at the data problem itself, I decided that you know we needed to move to Lua generated templates, which is something that a lot of MediaWiki has been doing. I don't know about you guys, but in a lot of senses, a lot of projects have been migrating to Lua managed templates, and I do think it's the way to go. It's just that there were not exactly um, off-the-shelf solutions that I could see at the time, so I kind of made my own. And essentially, it draws from a blueprint, which is the foundation that you see on the left, and it builds from that towards a rendering engine, then a data processing one, and finally it attaches the semantic layer on top of all of that, right? So this was important to establish as well because again there's an ordering problem here. Um, Working with MediaWiki is very um, ordering oriented, right? So it's important the way that things render the sequence of events is very important. And
Mark, I'm
yep.
sorry, we were running into audio problems here, so I couldn't tell you
Oh well.
earlier. But we have reached the end of our time. I'm sorry I didn't give you a good uh, amount of time to look at this. But yeah, we need to wrap this
Yep.
up. Anything
So
else
I'll wrap
important
it.
that you need to share?
Uh, yep. I'll wrap it real quick. Have semantic discipline. Establish some boundaries for your semantic media wiki. That's actually very important. It helps a lot to keep the server alive and not exploding. Also, you need to keep that in mind when you're implementing within a service context. That stability will be rocked by the implementing something like semantic media wiki, but it's a fun time. It's all good. Let's keep rocking. Let's wiki. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.